So you got something like this that sticks like a son of a gun coming out of your last corner on the back straightaway, and you make 840 horsepower at the wheels, and you're going to be hauling the mail. What's up, people? All right, so we had such a big response from the video I did relating to this car and the potential of putting a VTEC Honda engine in it derived from S2000 and why you would do such a thing. So I wanted to make this video, and today we're going to go over a multitude of different engine swap possibilities, which I think you all can learn from if you're thinking about doing them in your own car builds or race car builds. But of course, in relation to how it would work with this Reynard car, which came from the era of the IndyCar split in '96 and '97. And let's start. So, LS engines and Chevy pushrod derivatives. We've got rotary engines. We've got, say, like the S2000 derived F-Series engines, the Honda VTEC 4 cylinders. We've got K-Series Honda VTEC engines that are typically from like Civics and stuff of a later time, which has some similarities. And then lastly, what about big motorcycle engines like from Hyabusa? Okay, we're gonna go over all of them. So first thing I'm gonna do is yank this bodywork so we can start seeing stuff together. Now, if you're just coming around to this video, this particular car originally ran in the Champ Car series and was powered by a methanol burning turbocharged smaller displacement Mercedes V8 engine, if I'm not mistaken. And this car ran by Mauricio Gugelmin in the Pac West series. Now, the interesting thing about Indy cars and Champ cars in America, there's lots of these things sitting around basically rotting because there's very little you can do with them anymore. You could vintage race them, but they're expensive because the maintenance is absurd. The building is absurd. It requires tremendous skill and effort and upkeep, and the engines are expensive. And the cars perform so highly that there's not a lot of people in the world that are really qualified to drive them fast. So what happens is, when these cars are utilized and done and the engines go back to manufacturers or whatnot, the rolling chassis aren't worth a whole lot. You can buy good rolling chassis of cars that were driven by famous people for 15 or 20 grand tops. So when you look at that, it's really interesting to think about finding an engine that you could put in it and use it as what could be a really high-performing, awesome, and relatively safe track day car, which is exactly what we're thinking of doing with this particular car. So watch the episode from yesterday as to more about this, but long story short, this car later ran in a little series called the American IndyCar series, which is from the early mid-90s to the 90s, that you could basically take an IndyCar or a Champ car, well, I guess it'd just be IndyCar back then, with a Cosworth engine and run it like that, or you could put a nasty methanol burning stock block Chevy type derivative in it. So I don't want to use this because, as you can see, this car is way overly complex, has all these insane electronics that are all prototype-like, and it requires lots of money and time and a pain in the butt, and it breaks almost all the time. It's prototyping, and which doesn't really make sense because there's no series for it, there's no going for it. If we want to compete in high-end vintage races like that, you're better off finding a car that was put together the way it was supposed to be and already tested, i.e. utilize all that time from the past that makes sense for you to actually run it and campaign it and maintain it. This particular car's engine lost the oil pressure, and it hurt itself. So I want you to all imagine this is just a carbon fiber monocoque, which is effectively from right here, this aluminum bulkhead forward, okay? This is the under tray, which I'm putting my foot on, and this is nothing more than a wing surface below the car. That under tray actually comes off and drops out. And when you take out the under tray, you're left with the transmission, or the transaxle, as it is called in this case, which the gears are oriented transversely, bolted to the engine, and a few bars for extra structure to the monocoque. And it's a very skinny structure. So, when you take the wings and the under tray and the side pods off of a car like this, it looks like a fluffy dog that fell in a swimming pool. You know what I mean? It's like, what is that little thing? So, if we get rid of all that, what do we have and what could work? Well, one of the first limiting factors, and the reason why I don't like a small block Chevy derivative, or for instance an LS, is these engines do not rev that high, okay? This one built to the 9s, it's an 11-degree individual throttle body. If you rev it 8,500, 9,000, probably a little more, you are really stressing the heck out of everything from the nature of the push rods to the reciprocating and how fast your piston speeds are. You're really pushing the edge. And that's like 9,000 RPM. The original engines in these things rev to like 12 or 14 grand. Now, the reason that's an issue is because this gearbox in 1997, which is the first year they became champ cars, changed from when they were Indy cars. It's transversely oriented, and if you put in the super speedway gears, like the gears from when these were doing like 250 plus miles an hour on a giant speedway, right, with little tiny wings on them, the tallest gears you can put in this still isn't quite enough gears for an engine that revs low, like this big Chevy, even though it makes the power. So you're out of gears. Also, the gears in this were designed for higher revving, lower torque. This is a torque monster. So you got to kind of be nice to the transaxle, and the spindly little starter shaft in this isn't really strong enough to turn over a big engine like that without breaking internally and becoming an absolute mess. And you can't reasonably get a flywheel on it because the engine's so low with the dry sump. So there's a bunch of issues I'll go into. Let's start with the gears. Have a look. Come on over here where there's good light. This graph shows basically, so first gear, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. So let's say you shifted 8 grand, 8,000 RPMs. Boom. First gear, as it's geared right now, is 60 miles an hour. Second gear is like 75. You can see better part of 90 for third, 105 for fourth, and then it strings out a little bit more, 125 for fifth, and then sixth gear with a super speedway will bring you up to 165 miles an hour. That's not that fast, okay? This yellow Corvette is an old tank from the 80s, makes 700 horsepower, 2,600 pounds, tube frame, and it's a giant brick. It's going that fast at Indianapolis on the road course down the back straightaway, and surely at Road America at 700 horsepower. So you got something like this that sticks like a son of a gun coming out of your last corner on the back straightaway, and you make 840 horsepower at the wheels, and you're gonna be hauling the mail. So, if you get into sixth gear and you run past 8 grand up in the higher RPM, if you look at it, you can extrapolate it, maybe 170, 175, but you're just asking for something to blow up and be a problem. You just are. So it doesn't make sense. So I think the better thing to do with this car is basically turn it into a formidable track day car that you can put a lot of miles on safely, so that one, you can test different setups and things with young people, for instance, wings, under trays, suspension setups, and get great data from with having low costs of running it. Not to mention, it makes it more fun when you can enjoy putting in the engineering and understand and learning that rather than hoping all this garbage works properly. And with it being, frankly, slower, if it made less horsepower, say it made 250, 400 horsepower, something like that, it's still a formidable machine that requires a lot of talent to drive, but it's something you could put a lot more miles on easily, as an athlete and whatnot, or even the possibility of getting a newer driver in that you would never be able to do with a car that performs this high. So I think those are all positives and why it would be nice to put in a different motor. Now I want to show you guys a couple other things. So we started talking about spatial considerations, and a lot of you commented a rotary engine, right? A Wankel-derived engine. That's a great idea because they rev high and you can make a lot of power with them. And if you just look in here, they don't necessarily get too long, okay? Lengthwise it works, they're not real big around, they'd fit, you'd have some exhaust on the side, some intake stuff, and a lot of room to work with. There's a big problem with using one, and that's why I didn't bring them up, and we're gonna have to basically scratch off running a Wankel engine. Come here and look at this. I'll point out with my Swiss Army knife. So here's your height datums for the side of the Reynard and the chassis. And you can see, and they didn't put the measurement on ride height because you can change that, but basically this flat surface here, the transaxle, to the bottom of your under tray, you're only looking at, what is that? Is this in, hold on, I gotta look and see if this is in millimeters or in inches. Oh gosh, Casey, you're a dingus. That's in millimeters, okay. So 2 inches is all we're looking at. Now, this area right here, from here to here, is effectively your bell housing. The only clutch you can get in there to the input shaft of the transmission is a 5.5-inch clutch. Those like multi-disc little tiny puck things. And in fact, this Chevy has no flywheel on it and no starter gear. It literally has the clutch bolted directly to the output shaft on the back. And it's dry sump with the oil pan being so close to the bottom of the crankshaft because it's so low. Otherwise, you'd be hitting the ground. Here's the bottom of the transaxle. And this was made so that you can get everything insanely low to be the ultimate speed machine. Open wheel cars in the mid 90s are faster than they are now. It just is, okay? IndyCar racing as it was in 1996, or Champ Car racing a little bit later, because IndyCar racing got kind of lame after 96, was insanely fast and insanely awesome. Today's okay, but it was frankly better back then. But have a look at this. So you can just barely get a 5.5-inch clutch inside there where the output shaft is. Now, if you look, this is the bottom of the car. This is touching the belly pan. The ride height has to be super low to get the aero effect, so you really don't have much room. The other thing that would be lovely to do with this is stop having to use the auxiliary starter. And I mean, this thing works great. Once you're on the track, you don't need to restart it unless you're an idiot driver and spin out and install it. And this thing, boom, plugs in the back. You got 3 big batteries in series running 36 volts. And I mean, this thing will turn over a 400 cubic inch high compression small block Chevy to like 1100 RPMs. That is an awesome starter. But it'd be a lot nicer to be able to just plug in an auxiliary battery, hit a button, and have an onboard starter. And if you had a smaller engine, like one of these Hondas or something, you could do that. The car already, in that configuration, would be making about the same power, a little bit more than a Form Atlantic car. It would just weigh substantially more and be bigger, which is cool because it's robust, it'll last a long time, and it'll be safer for a track day car. So you could kind of get away with having a starter and a flywheel. The added weight isn't that big a deal. But in that circumstance, you still have this being the very bottom of the car, and so your flywheel has to be small enough in diameter from that center line that it's not colliding with the ground. And you don't really want to jack with your ride height that much. So that's sort of a trick of it too. Some of these small displacement engines work well with there. Now I know some of you guys are thinking bike engines, we're going to come to that. So the reason why I initially thought S2000 motor or those smaller displacement Hondas, those things are making like better part of 250 horsepower as a production-based car that revs to the better part of 9,000 RPM and is supposed to do that for 100,000 miles. If you get a dry sump belly pan on that, so you can actually slam it low enough to make it work with the transaxle here and the input shaft, and you'd have to run dry sump. There's no getting away with it. It would have to be like almost nothing on the bottom of it. You cannot run a wet sump, not only because of the G's, this thing's pulling serious G's in the corner, way more than any street car, okay? That oil is going to be sloshed, you're going to starve it, you're screwed, okay? You have to run dry sump to get it low enough and also for the G forces, okay? So the S2000 motor is pretty good and you can build it for a lot of power. But somebody mentioned to me the K-series engines, which were used in like later, I guess, Accords and Civics and things like that. The K-series motor revs, I believe, over 8,000 RPMs stock. The bigger ones, I think, have steel cylinder liners instead of the aluminum ones, which can be nice, especially if you're starting to build power. There's some positives there. But they're far cheaper than an S2000 motor if you buy them, you know, secondhand, and there's apparently more parts available for them. Those are all positives. So, frankly, if we do the Honda motor thing, I'm leaning kind of towards these K-series. It makes a lot of sense. And of course, you know, 250 horsepower in this car would be fun, especially if you're like an amateur, a newbie, but honestly, that's not much horsepower for this car. I mean, it'd be way underpowered. I mean, it'd be fast. It would still smoke about everything at a track day, period. It just, you'd obliterate it, and it'd be great testing, and it'd be kind of easy going and all that, but it's kind of slow. But the nice thing about those Honda engines is, since they're already making the better part of 250 horsepower stock, even if you just give it a little bit of forced induction, just a little, just modest boost, maybe change the pistons in the con rods so it's happy, or make sure you're getting enough fuel at it so you're not going to blow it up anytime soon. You know, making 350 or 400 horsepower is going to get this thing around. It's going to get it more of a formidable track day machine. And, you know, really, you're not competing with anybody. You're just making a great development and testing type car, but you want a little bit of power. That's going to last a long time. It's also nice that my camera guy's making a motorcycle thing. Is it because of the noise out there? What? Oh, the motorcycle engine. Okay, I'll get to that. Okay, so these Honda motors. The other positive thing about it is they have timing chains, okay? Which timing belts are just fine. You can rev them to the moon. They have value. But a car like this is going to be a paperweight 360 days of the year for years to come. So it's nice to have something that can stand the test of time and just sitting without totally going bad. In that circumstance, you have a timing chain and whatnot, and you'll probably end up having a belt for your oil, your dry sump, which kind of makes this a moot point. But the only things that are going to go bad over time, you got to watch your fuel bladders. Obviously, your tires go hard, and your belts. Those are kind of the biggest thing. The rest of the stuff you can keep an eye on pretty regularly and be happy. Obviously, you just run water in the cooling system of a race car, so in the winter you want to switch it over to something glycol-based so it doesn't corrode on the inside. And if you lose your heat when you live up in Ohio like we do, it doesn't freeze and destroy your everything. So I'm still a big proponent of these Honda motors, but some other people were talking bike engines, right? Hyabusa, come on. We're talking, what, 1,400 cc's potentially. These things are making 200 horsepower stock. They're revving to like 12 grand or 10 grand or whatever. There's all kinds of great bike engines and they're cheap. There's a few problems with this guys. One, 200 horsepower is a crap load for a motorcycle, but it's nothing for this, okay? So you're already down on horsepower. Bike engines are already stressed in terms of they're not made to go 100,000 miles so much as like a car engine. You're not making the torque, okay? It's still cool. So the problem is if you want to make more horsepower, you then have to stress something that's already crazy stressed. And you're creating more problems than you're really solving. But a bike motor is alluring initially to think of because they're not that big. You put it in transverse, right? And you couple the output shaft of the transmission to it. Maybe you take out some gears for drag and you run it in top gear that runs the highest RPMs going out. And then you just run your IndyCar transaxle. The problem is on most bike engines, I tell you what, let's just walk over here and look at the Top Gun bike. I want to illustrate my point. The problem with bike engines are, and somebody did mention they're already made to be stressed. Well, yeah, in certain ways, not the way of the IndyCar. If you go stressing a bike engine in transversely, trying to make this your whole chassis, you'll probably ruin it, okay? But come on over to the other side, yes, where the chain is. Here's the kicker. Let's get down low and look at this together. Okay, so you see the chain. Now, the sprocket is right about here, okay? Look at the distance from the sprocket to the bottom of the sump. It's this far. That's not going to fit. You're going to be into the ground and below, you know what I mean, where the sprocket output is. So then somebody might think, well, I really want to run a bike engine. Oh, that's cool, man, I get it. But you're going to have to find a way to get the engine high enough so it's not a problem, which means you're going to need some sort of transfer gears, transfer case, chain, or belt drive. The problem with having a chain or belt drive so close together, let's say here's your output shaft and here's your input shaft of the transmission. And you make a whole thing that bolts onto the bell housing that supports the input shaft of the transmission, has an output. So you have two gears here. You're going to run this small of a belt for that long with that much horsepower. I would be impressed if that lasts two outings on two 10-minute outings on a track. Like, you're creating more problems than you're solving. The whole point of this is to make a robust, long-lasting, great, just track day car to test and development. So the problem with the bike engine is it's overly stressed. It'll fit, okay, but you can't mate it up to this transmission very well, okay? You can do it, but they suck, okay? I've seen some of these where people put a Goldwing motor in where they're horizontally opposed and they fit and they're okay, but they don't make enough power. They're lame. Who wants to drive a car this awesome that doesn't make any power? It would be boring. I know you're saying it's fun. I mean boring, okay? The truth about racetracks are, if you've never been on one, a car that seems fast on a street is like dog poop slow on a racetrack. My Dodge Viper is a formidable machine on the street, and it is just abysmally slow on a racetrack. Do you know what I'm saying? So you don't want to take a car that is like the best chassis with the best aerodynamics in the world and put some dorky little engine in it. You're going to be out there like, yay, look at me, yay, I'm like Walter Mitty. No, that's lame. It needs to have a good purpose, so that's why, unfortunately, the bike engines are out. They don't really make sense. Also, it'd look kind of dorky to have an engine like leaning over to the side that's clearly from a bike and this goofy transmission and such. If it worked great, then that's cool, but bike engines are out. Rotaries are out because their output shaft has to be in the middle, basically, and they've got a lot of distance for that rotor to be spinning around all loony over here. So they also don't fit. You can't get them in because of how low the transaxle is. So that's the big reason rotaries are out. That's the reason why motorcycle engines are generally out, because it just doesn't make sense to have to make transfer gears. It's just, you're getting beyond. So the best thing you can reasonably do is get one of these Honda engines, like I said, and get that in there with a dry sump. Now, somebody else will mention, well, Casey, wait a minute. Let's make more power. Let's put in a Toyota or a Nissan drive like Skyline or Supra sweet straight 6 engine. They make stupid power. Well, you're right. You can do that, but there's a big problem. they're long, okay? This is a V8. It's basically 4 big cylinders in length. A Honda engine, 4 smaller cylinders in length, so it'll fit. The 2 JZs and things like that, the straight 6s, they're long, which means to get it in there, your wheelbase is gonna grow, which you may not notice that much, but it's already enormous. It's already huge. Like, it's just, you're getting a little silly. The truth of the matter is, with this Chevy-derived V8 in it, the wheelbase on this actually did increase by about this much, which didn't really matter that much, but it's something. And you can see that illustrated right here, because the under tray naturally would stop right here, and that's where this piece would bolt on. And this one has this piece of aluminum that elongates it, if you can see that right there. And that's all taken up because the engine is longer. So ideally what we'd like to have is an engine in length that fits within the confines of this V8. And the other positive thing about having a slightly shorter engine, I believe the F-Series S2000s are approximately 20.5 inches in length from the mating surface of the bell housing flange in the back to the forwardmost position of their pulleys. And it's very nice to be able to run a stock alternator, a stock water pump, and all those things on there with a serpentine belt, because they were made to go hundreds of thousands of miles, okay? And people are like, but Casey, you can put an electric water pump in, and you can put an alternator dripping off the back. Yeah, you can do those things, but you're adding complexity and crap to break. It's already got an electric water pump. All it does is tax the electrical system in a car that has a teeny tiny battery that's shoved down in there. And then if you go put in the alternator on the output flange, even if you can find a reasonable place to put it, which you can't, it's not designed for that, you'd have to make something here to drive it and have a belt coming off here and mounting your alternator back here, which is dorky. It's high and it's in the airstream. It's just not, it's not great in engineering intelligence. It's a Band-Aid. You're not gaining much. And if you're idling around in the pits and warming it up, the car's not moving, you're not charging, so it's got to be plugged in. It's much nicer to have a car that can be self-contained when you have to actually live with it long term. So the reason why the bike engines are out largely, 1, they don't fit, 2, they're high-strung and don't make much horsepower. The Rotaries are a great idea, but for this car, they're too tall. There's too big a distance from the output flange to the bottom, and they won't fit to get it down that low. So you're really stuck with V configuration engines or inline engines that are effectively shorter in length than the small block Chevy. So that's the reason why I focus on kind of like the Honda 4-cylinder VTEC sort of motors. You can make a lot of power. They're good. They get a timing chain. That's kind of nice. And it's a great way to go. Now, LS engines, right? LS swap the world. Okay. Relax, everybody. Okay, I finally come back around to being into LS swap engines. Now that I'm doing the 944, I'm really not into putting LS engines in a Porsche, but I kind of looking at it going, that'd be kind of fun. I wouldn't mind that. I got a buddy that's got one in a 300ZX that's cool. But in this, putting an LS in this doesn't really work so well because you're making the power, but it doesn't really have the RPMs. Okay, I mean, it would work and you can kind of bolt it up and it would bolt to this, but then you still got to put a flywheel on it, hopefully, to start it, and the engine's bigger, so then the starter would have to go back here and you'd have to engineer it and hog things out with this crazy bell housing of this transaxle that was designed to have a turbo in it and not that. Okay, it becomes a pain in the butt. So you basically still have the issues you wanted to solve with the V8. The other thing too, which I have to point out, this car was designed to cool a methanol or alcohol burning smaller displacement V8. Now it made a lot of horsepower, so it made heat too. But these openings were designed at speed with these radiators and oil coolers for something that burns alcohol. They run a lot cooler. They just do than gasoline. Gasoline's nice because you can get it everywhere. If your whole car lights on fire and your drivers and your crew, you can at least see it. That's why at Indy they would be splash of water on literally everybody because they don't know who's on fire because you can't see the flames during the day real well. So that's no fun. And this car's already been converted to gas, so the fuel cell is already set up for gasoline. So converting it back to methanol, you're going to be spending thousands of dollars on a new fuel bladder. And I know some people are like, we'll make one out of aluminum. No. You're making more work than you need to, okay? Plus, alcohol does nasty things to the insides of engines. You have to pickle it, and it's a pain in the butt. Just go gasoline, okay? Now, if you run a smaller engine that doesn't make quite as much power, it's also nice because this cooling system will do just fine. There's radiator on that side, there's radiator on this side, you got an oil cooler. You're going to have no problems cooling it as well. And you can always boost it to make a little bit more horsepower, say anything from 350 to 550. It's going to be a great, formidable track day machine, also quite safe. This is a robust, just awesome monocoque structure. And, you know, truth be told, even if you did have an off and you took off a corner, like, whoosh, there's a lot of these things laying around. Nobody's doing anything with them, so you can get parts for it. It's not even a big deal. But I don't think you're going to do that. I think it's going to go really well. I thought I'd show you that real quick regarding the monocoque. Come here and have a look. All right, so this is showing the transaxle. Here is effectively the bell housing. That's the input shaft. It goes down here to 90-degree drive gears so that then all the gears can be transverse. The gear stacks go in from the side, which you can see the side case here. Also, it's a sequential shifter, so you just bang the stick shift forwards or backwards. That's really nice. It has reverse with a reverse lockout. And the differential back in here, which is adjustable on its limited slip, is not cut at a 90-degree like the typical rear ends. It's cut, you know, more like spur gear. So that's pretty neat. There's a bolt-on structure up here. I don't think I pulled that one out to see. But here's the bolt-on section here. You need that because that's where the suspension bolts, as well as your shocks here, where they connect right there, as well as the top of the motor. So you need that for the structure. That is that. Now the monocoque structure, which I'll illustrate here, the actual monocoque, or like the driver's cell or whatnot, is this centerpiece right here. Not these. This is for air. This is basically flimsy carbon, as is the bottom wing or the under tray. I mean, it's strong. It's made to, you know, be pulled to the ground with lots of force. That's why it has these really rocking supports. But all of this could get wiped right out in a wreck. So this is the monocoque. You can see the bare carbon fiber. The monocoque chassis here, it's quite thick. It was made to go in the wall at 250 miles an hour, and preferably don't kill people. And then you can paint it. So that's all there is right there. But here, if you look, when you make a carbon fiber structure like this, it's got, and I'm not sure, I think this one probably has maybe an aluminum honeycomb in it, but it's reasonably thick. It's about this thick. So you have layers of carbon on one side, layers of carbon on the other side, and then you have a core, okay, which is a lightweight type of structure to build a more rigid thing. And I have a feeling this one is a honeycomb of sort. If it's not aluminum, it might be like a Kevlar-based honeycomb on the inside. The problem with that is if you need to bolt something to the side of this, if we just drill a hole and bolt something in structure, it'll crush it. So you need a hard point. And typically you'd have something like a phenolic that when you lay up your monocoque, when you're doing that, you have already engineered where the hard points are, such as like where the suspension bolts in. That's got to take a lot of structure. So inside here, instead of the honeycomb, there's a hard point, so you can bolt it rigidly, and it can take those stresses. The back is no different. In fact, the back is incredibly crucial for the hard points. Now, there's this big, beautiful CNC'd aluminum plate that bolts to the back of the monocoque with all these little bolts. Okay, and those little ones are great for something big. So for instance, and this was later designed, this chromoly tubular structure has a big flange, all these little bolts holding it on, and that does a good job of focusing all the forces into the end of the monocoque here this way. That works. Now, the main tough structure, so this is like an Ilmor engine showing the design. This little flange here, as you can see, would bolt to the monocoque with two big pins right here, very strong pins. They thread into the monocoque, and they're specifically designed to take the force of the motor. There's two here and two here, and then on the bottom, I think there's four, 1, 2, 3, 4 big ones. Those big ones at the bottom would bolt to the bottom of this engine, which is made to be stressed, okay? This setup, the original racing setup, did not require any other structure to take the stresses of the nature of the chassis. It was the chassis also. And then this plate here to effectively the cam covers is your mount here that would mount to the top of the bell housing. You can see right here with these three there. This one, being the small block Chevy derivative, it's got a block on the end of the head, which bolts here and then here and mates it. This one, this is where the two pins are here, and there's a giant plate that bolts like to everything on the front of the motor and takes it. And then again, you've got chromoly rods here and chromoly down here. So, long story short, guys, you all had some great ideas. I appreciate the feedback on those engines with the Hondas. Truth be told, I don't have as much experience with Honda motors, just engines in general and knowing. So that was a great tip relating to that the K series is potentially a better choice than the Honda S2000 F series because they're a little less money, they're readily available, there's potentially more parts there, and it would be a great scenario. But I'm ruling out bike engines. Don't think it's a good way to go. The rotaries aren't going to fit well in this scenario. And I like them, but I don't like them. So maybe we'll do something with them in the future. And putting in another V8 engine doesn't really make this better for a number of reasons. It's cool, but it doesn't really make it better. So I think the Hondas are the way to go. The other thing I want to bring up is I showed you the gear ratio charts in top speed. Obviously, if you put any kind of engine in this that is making 250 to 500 horsepower, you're never hitting the top speeds. Okay, this thing can make like, I don't have the graphs on it, but I think this thing can make like 6,000 plus pounds of downforce at, I don't know, 180. That's a heck of a lot of drag, okay? So even if you got rid of some of the downforce, put on a little bit different wing, got rid of some of the elements, and ran it in a little bit lower drag road course configuration, even if you just want a track day car, it was a little high, you're not getting full ground effect, it's still a draggy machine. The truth be told about open wheel cars, having your wheel in your Airstream is literally the stupidest thing possible. That's why I think Formula One is irrelevant nowadays, because the basic idea behind Formula One having the wheels out in the Airstream is what we did in pre-war times, like the 1930s, because it was lighter. We didn't know anything about aerodynamics at all. But we're still doing that and saying, this is the best thing in the world. No, it's not. It's not slippery. You're not making the downforce because everybody's afraid to go fast and get hurt anymore. It's true. Shoot me. Anyway, I wanted to bring that up because it makes a ton of drag. So to go fast and overcome the drag, you need a lot of power. So the neat thing is with the gears in here, the Speedway gears, even though the Honda only revs to say 8,500 stock, and maybe you build it up and it's revving to 10 grand. Let's say it revs to 10 grand because you want something that lasts a long time instead of revving it to the moon. It's not going to make enough power to overdo the gears. Do you know what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is kind of nice because you're never going to have to change gear ratios. They're close enough, it's going to be just fine for track days. So it's just one and done. Start it up, put fuel in it, make sure things look good, the right tires, let's nut and bolt check it, make sure it's safe. Get out on the track, learn some stuff, you know? So that's really where I think the value is there. And then of course, if in the future with Gina's Garage or whatnot, we want to go really fast, we want to compete with some high-end vintage races or whatnot, or even something modern, we can always go out and get another Indy car that has all the proper running gear and you know, run it as it was originally intended, or an older F1 car, a GP2 car, or something like that. So this car, sadly, is kind of a beautiful abomination. And this is a great motor. All this Motec electronic is fantastic. It's also kind of expensive to get. So I think all of the good stuff in here that's worth something, the motor, the electronics, all the data acts should come out for a different car for Gina's Garage in the future, some supercar project, race car project, maybe we do a one-off prototype with the students, and then what's left of the Indy roller should just be made a simple, worthwhile, utilizable machine, which no matter what it's got in it, if it moves under its own power and can do that reliably, is going to be a heck of a lot better than what it is right now, which is a big paperweight. So that's all I got right now, but thank you all for the feedback. I appreciate it. I got more videos coming. I hope you'll share this. And of course, in the meantime, like, comment, and naturally subscribe. See you guys later.